Hi, everyone. It's Lisa Marsh Myerson. I'm just so pleased to once again be able to have a momentum session here at GSA's annual scientific meeting. It is one of the highlights of every year for me to be with all of you, where we discuss a range of research and solutions across a wide range of disciplines as well. So you're in for, I know, an exciting conversation today because I have three terrific colleagues and leaders who are joining me today. We're going to be talking about fostering resilience as we fight poverty. Resilience is such an important topic. We all certainly know that older adults have resilience, and we see evidence of that in our work lives and in our daily lives, in our neighborhoods, in our own families, in our own lives. Older adults who live with low income also have resilience, but for certain we know that it's important for us organizationally and individually to find solutions to foster that resilience. I think you all know that at AARP Foundation, that is foundational to our work. We work to serve vulnerable people who are 50 and older, to create and advance effective solutions so that they can increase their income and also increase equitable outcomes, especially for older adults who have experienced systemic racism and other forms of discrimination. The last 2 years, wow, we have seen resilience in our communities and among individuals in full force. We have also seen devastating impacts and disparate impacts for low-income adults and communities nationwide. And we certainly know that as we have nationwide conversations about individuals re-entering the workforce or a gap among and between workers and job openings, that there are millions of older adults who want to remain in the workforce and want to re-enter the workforce, and tapping into their own resilience and having supports through programs that we all design and offer will be critically important. We see it at AARP Foundation, whether it's through our Senior Community Service Employment Program, our Back to Work at 50 Plus program, or our Work for Yourself 50 Plus program. All of these are programs designed to help older adults who are living with low income have the skills and tools they need to advance or be hired for in-demand jobs in their communities. And then wrapping communities of connections around older adults is equally important. Recently, my team worked with Cynthia, who lost her job during the pandemic. She was, first, her hours were reduced, and then she learned that she would be on an extended furlough, and then she learned that she was permanently let go from her position. But working in our Back to Work 50 Plus program with a coach, going through our 7 Smart Strategies job seeking program, upskilling and increasing her digital skills, helped Cynthia be ready when new opportunities were available. So now let me introduce you to my wonderful colleagues, these three terrific leaders who are joining me today to talk about resilience and how we build resilience by fostering hope, economic opportunity, and social connections for all. Let me start with an introduction, Valerie, for you. I'm really excited to introduce my colleague and now new colleague and friend, Dr. Valerie Mahomes, who's joining us. Valerie's dedicated her career to addressing the challenges of low-income children and families. From her early work as an educator to her current role with the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at NIH, Dr. Mahomes supports biomedical and behavioral sciences research and actively calls attention to the short and long-term psychological and health consequences of experiencing adversity early on in life. Dr. Mahomes has published numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, and her most recent book, titled Fostering Resilience and Well-Being in Children's and Families in Poverty, Why Hope Still Matters. So good to see you, Valerie. And also a longtime colleague and friend, Maria Flynn, is joining us. Maria is the president and CEO of Jobs for the Future, known as JFF, a national nonprofit that drives transformation in the American workforce and education systems. Maria's commitment to JFF's vision of economic advancement for all and her leadership in workforce policy have made her a national authority on the future of work, the role of technology in the labor market, and career pathways for underserved individuals and employer engagement. In 2018, Maria, I was delighted when you launched JFF Labs within JFF to bridge to bridge the traditional education and workforce systems with innovative approaches and technology-enabled solutions. Always great, Maria, to talk with you about economic opportunity. And Risa, I was so delighted when you agreed to join Valerie and me and Maria for this conversation. Risa Wilkerson is the Executive Director of Healthy Places by Design, a nonprofit consulting group serving philanthropy, nonprofit, and community-based organizations across the United States. Risa provides overarching guidance and strategic vision to fulfill the organization's mission of advancing community-led action. And that's important to repeat, community-led action and proven place-based strategies to ensure health and well-being for all, with a clear focus on equity, integrity, and collaboration. And recently and importantly, Risa and her team, in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, published a report, Socially Connected Communities, Solutions for Social Isolation. What a treat for us to be joined together, having this very important conversation about fighting poverty and combating poverty with resilience. So I want to open it up with a question to get us started for all of you, but I'll start with you, Valerie. We've seen in the past 2 years during this pandemic, the problem in society when institutions, communities, and individuals try to separate people by generations. Because what we've seen is interconnectedness. I'm seeing you all nod, and how woven together our generations are. During the pandemic, we had grandparents who were helping school grandchildren. We saw caregivers of all ages caring for older adults in their lives and for people of all ages who needed that support. So why is it important for us to build solutions that build resilience across the generations? Valerie, I'll start with you. And I'll ask you to come off mute, Valerie.
Yes.
That is the statement of the past 2 years.
Please unmute yourself, or the reverse. Well, it is such a wonderful opportunity to see this wonderful connectedness arise out of a difficult situation. One of the reasons that it's so important is that we all want to contribute. We all want to make a difference. And for older adults, we want to leave a legacy. People want to know that their lives matter, not only to themselves and their immediate family, but to their communities and broader society to the extent possible. So these kinds of intergenerational activities are important because they give that sense of contribution and meaning. And across the developmental spectrum, we all are looking for meaning in our lives. For young people, we look for meaning in different ways. And, that's the area where I've spent most of my work in. But as I get older, those are things that are important to me as well. And so having these opportunities for social support and social engagement across the generations is important. Mentoring is important. And the things that you described really are aspects of mentoring. They're showing young people what you can do, contributions that you can make, ways in which to do random acts of kindness and selflessness, despite what your income levels may be, that you can give, you can contribute. And the one thing that I want to point out also about mentoring is that across the generations, it has to be bi-directional. It's not this one person, the sage, on the stage, as we like to say, giving expertise and sharing time with a younger, less experienced person, but it's the acknowledgement that I can receive something from someone who is younger than me, that may not have the experiences that I have, but that can show me aspects of my life that are meaningful and can help me to look inside myself, to look beyond my current worldview to see where I can make a difference and how I can make a difference. So all of these things are critically important.
Thanks for getting us started, Valerie. Risa, talk to us about intergenerational community connections.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And Valerie, I appreciate what you're saying as well. It really resonates with me. I think the important thing here is to recognize that, social connections across generations and across all ways that we identify ourselves are critically important, not just to get through a pandemic, but at all times, right? So we know that strong social connections and networks can boost a person's lifespan by 50%, which is just incredible. And I think we underestimate, the need to kind of what it means to have those strong social connections and networks. And, we talk about too, how we've sort of isolated or kept our generations apart when we think about how we design our social services or our spaces, and this is also true when we think about age, not just age, but income and race and ability.
Yes.
We have just designed our communities in ways that isolate us, keeping us apart, in so many different ways. Historic policies like redlining have segregated neighborhoods by race, right? And public housing has been consolidated to specific locations that segregate people by income. And we can go on and on with these examples. But, it's really time. And I think the pandemic has shown us that we all do better when everyone does better.
That's right.
And that we are better together. And we really need to design and build our communities in ways that do just that across the board.
I think that's so great, Risa, because you're right. Communities can only be healthy if they provide an opportunity for all members of the community to contribute.
That's
and
right.
to really not just survive, but to thrive. So we're getting at this. And when we're talking about combating poverty, you just can't have a single generation solution, because this is, in particular for older adults, there is often a moving in and out of opportunity or having enough income to meet your needs. Maria, jump in on this. You really have built and led so many programs that have helped people of all ages either stay connected or reconnect to economic opportunity. So jump in.
Yeah, I love the theme of interconnectedness, and it also just makes me think of just the intersectionality, I think, that we're, kind of dealing with in this moment, because I think we've all been impacted by the pandemic, but in different ways. And I think in the media, we hear a lot of, I think, critically important stories about impact by race, about impact by gender. But, I think really looking at the intersectionality of race kind of across the impacts is critical as well. Because if you look at in the first 6 months of the pandemic, if you were over 55 years old, you had a 17% more likely of a chance to be let go of your job, right? So the statistics really told a really interesting story, not a good story, but a very clear story that, if you were an older worker, you were, going to be at risk. And if we look at what we know now, almost, a year and a half into this, we have 1.7 million workers over 50 who have left the labor market altogether, probably for many different reasons. And as you were just saying, Lisa, older workers are likely to kind of move in and move out based on different demands. But how do we as a society and our communities start to design solutions with, kind of these workers at the center, and really thinking about, what strategies, what designs are most critical for different age groups, for different populations? Because by 2026, almost a quarter of our workforce are going to be over 55. So this is an age group that is going to continue to grow in our workforce. And how do we kind of build the workforce of the future around the needs of many generations?
Yeah, I'm so happy that you shared those statistics, Maria, because it's also important. The call to action is, let's not wait until 2025 to design for 2026. And we do know my colleagues at AARP have led and engaged in research that absolutely shows that multi-generational workplaces are good for people. It goes to, Valerie, your point about bi-directional mentoring. It goes to, Risa, your point about being sure that everybody has the social connections that they need to have their well-being be at peak, which is so important. And Maria, as you're saying, so that individuals are work ready. And we recognize that the changing landscape, and at its core, when we think about our topic about helping older adults who are low income, multi-generational solutions that understand the intersectionality of individuals' identities and understand those who have been locked out of opportunity most because of the way systems have been created and maintained. And Risa spoke about some of those, including redlining. Clearly, we've seen in the pandemic, Maria, you reminded us, who's left most out? Older workers, age discrimination. Who among older workers? Women. Who among older workers who may be women? Women of color. So it really, but there's a lot of opportunity for organizations and communities to meet their spoken DEI goals by starting from human-centered design right now. So a lot for us to talk about. Valerie, I'm going to move back to you. I've had a chance to talk to you before and to read your writing. And I would love for you to talk with those of us who are joining us today about hope as a driver of building resilience for individuals and then therefore ultimately for communities. I think it's really important for you to help people understand what you mean by that. What is hope and what isn't it?
One of the things that I want to start with, of course, is that hope is so important. And what motivated me to write about hope is this notion that, the way that we have this deterministic view about what people can do based on, their demographics, their age, their circumstances in life. And one of the things that I wanted to share in my writing was that hope still matters, that despite where you are now, it doesn't mean that your life has to end that way. And of course, at that point, I was writing mostly about youth and adolescents, but even in carrying that theme to older adults, there are still many opportunities to grow and to advance. We are growing, living, thriving organisms as human beings. And as part of our DNA is movement and advancement and strength and thriving and fighting through barriers to fight, fighting through stigma to fight. So for me, and in working with and citing researchers who are studying hope, we talk about hope not as this pie in the sky kind of aspirational thing where people are just hoping passively for an outcome. But we talk about hope as a motivating factor, as an active, engaging, thinking construct that allows us to move toward and to achieve goals that are valued for us. So it's not an externally driven, but it's internally driven, intrinsically motivating force that allows us to move from point A to point B and to achieve those goals. It is a resource, an internal resource that we all have. And having hope allows us to change our worldview, to see where we are, to take the kind of constraints off, especially those constraints that poverty brings about. Opens up your worldview to help you to see what you can be. You talked about the pandemic, and I hear lots of stories about job loss and all of those sorts of things, but I also hear stories about people pivoting and recognizing that I have a second chance now to do something that I always wanted. This is how I think I can move from point A to point B. And in our view, and in the work that we do, that is what hope is, that you can see something, that you have the wherewithal to do it, that you have the sense of efficacy and agency to carry out those goals. And in carrying out those goals, then you can change those circumstances around you. And, we focus on all the collateral aspects of poverty that also get in the way, which, we can talk about as we go along. But being able to move and to drive and to ultimately thrive is what hope is all about.
I think that is such an important conversation because it is hope as a driver for resilience and hope as foundational for creating a pathway and being able to stick in that pathway, as you're saying, Valerie. And I think organizationally, we need to use hope as a driver as well in order for us to continue to help individuals as they're transforming their lives. Maria, it's a great segue into all of the work that you do, because we all know and the work that the two of us share as we're trying to be sure that there are abundant opportunities for individuals who cannot meet their basic needs. Talk to me about what you've learned in your career about proven strategies to help individuals have access to income building opportunities, and maybe policies that you believe are essential as well.
Sure, absolutely. So, big picture, I feel what we really need in our country is a more agile, equitable, and resilient workforce system. And I define that broadly to include not just workforce development, but economic development and income support and poverty alleviation programs, because I feel like where we are at this moment is we have, built upon many decades of progress, dating back to the New Deal, but where we've ended up is a very fragmented system. I think that can be extremely confusing for individuals to wind their way through. And so I'm hopeful that, in the next few years, with the new administration, that we can really start thinking about, what would, as we talked about before, a truly human-centered system look like that didn't have a proliferation of different funding streams with different requirements and performance measures, and instead really have a more innovative and agile approach. But within that, there's three things that I would dig in on around, what I think really works. So one is career navigation. And I think a lot of times when we hear career navigation, maybe our minds go to, the high school seniors and their parents or the young people coming out of college. But I think what's critical is that we think about career navigation for workers at all ages and all levels. And thinking about, I love the conversation of hope and pivoting and looking at new pathways. And it's almost like changing from this theoretical conversation around the future of work to helping individuals think, what's the future of me? What's my future? And what is
let's stop for a minute. Lisa and Valerie, let's join in. Exactly. Yes, yes. +1, Maria, the future of me.
Yeah.
Because I'm interrupting your train of thought to say that really underscores, as Valerie's saying and Risa was saying earlier, it's about a people-first design. Yeah. Human-centered design is people-first design. Yeah. So kudos.
And that's going to look different for everyone. And so how do we help folks, particularly older adults, to access the information they need to make those informed decisions? And I think that means engaging libraries and the American Job Centers and digital platforms as well, but really making that information accessible. And then I think second, just really building a true lifelong learning approach, right? That this isn't, someone goes and gets a degree or a credential and they're done, but what does that ongoing path look like? And then finally, and we'll probably dig into this more later, but really looking at the role of employers as well, particularly in this moment where, many employers are, hungry for skilled workers, using this as a moment to help them think more inclusively around, what talent pools are they looking at, where are they recruiting from, and kind of using this moment of pain in the labor market to really create opportunity for more workers.
All of that is so important, and I definitely want others to jump in, because you're talking about, or I hear you talking about, breaking down silos in what we would understand to be workforce modeling, and really driving into true collective impact, where we're coming together across our organizations and interests to say it's in the best interest of society to build connected communities where we recognize that we want more individuals to have healthier, longer lives, and where we recognize that earning income and having access to opportunity across a life course is really important for people, which makes it very important for communities as well. But it can't be something, if I'm hearing you accurately, Maria, that we can just pick against the edges. This is a real, it's the systems change
Exactly.
that we know needs to occur. So I do want us to continue to talk about it. And it's a great way, Risa, for you to jump in. And if you'd share with those who've joined us today a bit more about your work and what you've learned about how important trust is to building connected communities, and any sort of best practices or models you'd want to share with us about truly connected place-based strategies that could be used to fight poverty and to empower people across the life course.
Yeah, thank you. I love this conversation. I love the notion of hope, because hope is so integral, and as we are more and more connected with each other, we find that we're not alone. That gives us hope. We find that, others have been where we are and they have some solutions that have worked. That gives us hope. And this human-centered, centered approach is exactly what we talk about all the time. And throughout the report, we talk very much about community-centered solutions, inclusive practices, co-creating and co-designing solutions with those, the very residents that we're trying to reach, and with those who are most isolated, to create strategies that will really work for all. And, I think that what we've learned about, resiliency and overcoming the odds is that there's a virtuous cycle at play, right? And so rather than a vicious cycle, we talk about the virtuous cycle. And so the more connected we are, the more apt we are to be civically engaged in our community. And the more civically engaged we are, the more that the strategies that are implemented actually suit our needs and, represent who we are and help us to feel seen and heard, then the more socially connected we are, and it goes on and on, right? So people who live in socially connected communities are more likely to thrive for all of those reasons that we've been articulating. It is because they feel seen and heard and welcomed, because they trust each other and their government. And those trusting, meaningful relationships matter to our mental, our physical, and our emotional health and well-being. And so it's just extremely important that we are looking at all the ways that we can do this. Every person has a role to play. Every sector has a role to play. It's not just in the programs, although those are extremely important. How those programs are delivered and who delivers them and what the setting is for those programs matters. So does our community design and how we create our spaces. So I love libraries coming up, because libraries and parks and trails and even our public streets are places where we can gather together and get to know our neighbors and get to know people from other neighborhoods and really feel a sense of camaraderie and a sense of community. So it's just really important that we are sensitive to, the various perspectives and life experiences that people are having, and as a community that we are implementing culturally sensitive, trauma-informed strategies that help us to heal, especially from this pandemic, but also from all the historic, systems of oppression that have happened up to this point. We have a lot of healing to do, but we can do it together. And Valerie, I love that hope can be a part of that healing as well, and the interconnectedness between us all.
Yes, and I'm glad that you talked about being trauma informed, because having individuals working in these systems and engaging with individuals who are moving and changing, just recognizing that people have a history. They come to the place where they are with a history, and sometimes that history is a challenge, but sometimes it can be a catalyst to achieving the goals that they want to achieve, to moving beyond their current circumstances, for moving beyond the stigma of living in poverty. I sometimes recoil back from even using that phrase, because there's so much stigma attached to it. And we need to provide the kinds of the income and the wages, the work schedules, and break down those structural barriers and those systemic barriers that have gotten in the way. But on an individual level, just recognizing what people bring to their work and what they bring to their current circumstances is just so enriching. And that's how hope is fostered. And that's how it's engendered. People have it. But when we peel back the curtains curtains of life, the curtains of all the systemic isms and schisms, then people can see what they can be. And having folks work in those systems who are trauma informed or who understand that perspective at least is really, really helpful, I think, for folks to move forward and to achieve what they envision that they can be.
Such an important and a rich conversation that really does point back to also being very careful and thoughtful that we don't go off somewhere as leaders or organizations and plan solutions that we then think will, dump down into a community, right? I'm seeing nods or onto people. And I'm spurred on, Valerie, by what you're saying or what I'm hearing you say, which is be cautious of the words we use because they matter. And they can feel, and in fact, can be very limiting to individuals. It's why I'll often say, older adults living with low income.
Yes.
Doesn't define them totally, but
right.
They are living with low income now. So that's what motivates us to create the solutions to work with them. And truly, I know, Maria, as you're working with older adults and people of all ages to acquire the skills that they need and find meaningful work, that quality jobs with family sustaining wages and benefits, that if we ask, you and I know if you ask someone what they need, they'll tell you. So that is that co-creating in community with individuals. So as we stick there, Maria, will you talk about, you alluded earlier to the employer piece of it. What are you seeing as essential in engaging employers in community with individuals who need access to quality jobs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I completely agree with what Valerie and Risa were saying about how, the local piece matters, right? You can't kind of just have one national model and expect it to be replicated all over, right? You need to build solutions that really fit with your community, with your regional economy, with the employers and the companies that are doing business there and that are employing workers. And I think, this current increase in remote work, I think adds a really interesting dynamic to this mix as well, which I think our public systems need to start to really kind of get their heads around, like, what does that mean as they're helping folks navigate the system. But on the employer side, I think it really it's a range of things. One is, how are they sourcing their talent? How can they be looking to new sources of talent, diversifying their recruitment strategies? How can they maybe look at more of a skills-based hiring approach instead of relying on traditional degrees? We see a proliferation of examples where 4-year degrees are being required for jobs that really don't need them. So how do we encourage employers to move beyond that? And I think once individuals are in place on the job, really looking to see how employers can invest in those individuals, invest in their skill development, their advancement in the workforce. We're seeing examples from Amazon and Target and Walmart just in the past 6 weeks or so that are making commitments in that area. But then I think to the point around, kind of the continuum of care, so to speak, also looking to see what are those kind of life supports that employers can provide access to, I think is also critically important. And I think, we've all seen in the past 2 years just more and more importance being put on worker voice, right? And workers really expecting more and better things from their employers. And I think that's just going to continue. I don't think we're going to kind of go backwards from this. I think that is just going to continue. So quality of life, quality of jobs is all going to be critically important.
And that care for well-being that you're all speaking to, which is that's not a wasted investment, is what I hear the three of you talking about. And I agree. So it's the well-being, physical, social, emotional well-being, total well-being for individuals, and also for communities and for employers and places of work and organizations as well. Effort and money well spent to do all of that work up front is what I'm hearing from you, Valerie, Risa, and Maria as well. And I want to put a pin in, Maria. I agree with you. Life is long if we're lucky. And we want that longevity to be available to all people. And competency-based hiring is what I hear you speaking about, which is learning needs to be lifelong. And we've moved beyond the time where you can get one credential or degree and have that last across a lifetime, because people are curious, interests change, incomes change, needs change. But if you would hire for competencies that are needed, that I think also supports opening up the pool or the prospecting pool as well.
Yeah, and Lisa, I would
Go
wanted
ahead,
to just mention, this is all making me think about some of the newish avenues right now that kind of marry everything that we've been talking about. And so, for example, community navigators or community health workers who are bridging that divide between sort of traditional healthcare and the barriers that a lot of community members are experiencing in either accessing health services, for example, with transportation challenges or understanding the instructions. And when community health workers are hired from within a community, there's already trust there, right? And there's those types of systems are perfect, additional sort of avenues, if you will, for, some employment opportunities that also bring hope and connect communities and community members together. So that was coming to mind.
Risa, excellent point, because it also says what are the sort of new roles we might need or emerging roles as we think about helping more people have access to sustained opportunity. And I want to then ask you, Valerie, to talk about, I've had the great opportunity to talk to you about narratives. The narratives that exist in society about individuals or about communities. It's on my mind. So if you talk about hope and the narratives, because I'm mindful of the fact that we often, again, develop solutions and say we will go into an underserved community or work with a population with a solution we think works, as opposed to hearing the narrative and learning about, I know at AARP Foundation, older adults living with low income and living in communities that have been locked out of opportunity build really strong connections and count on each other to fill gaps. So we all have a lot to learn from those narratives.
Absolutely. And, there are these oases of hope and resilience in all of our communities, regardless of income levels. And when you talk about people living with low income, just think about what they have had to navigate in order to be successful, raising their children and grandchildren and living in communities that are under-resourced and going to schools and sending their children and grandchildren to schools that are under-resourced. What they have had to navigate to be successful is tremendous. And the skills that they have developed in navigating all of these challenges and twists and turns in life is just astounding. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from individuals who have had these experiences. I mentioned when we were talking earlier that I'm caregiving now for my dad, and for a short time he was in a nursing care facility. One of his fellow residents across the hall was playing the guitar, and I kind of walked over to his room and just asked him what he was doing. And I took the opportunity, in caring for my dad, to also meet and greet other families whose family members were living there as well. And Mr. Jones, I always refer to people, put a handle on it is a phrase that they use. I always put a handle on it. Mr. Jones, how you doing? Are you playing the guitar? And he says, yeah, I play the guitar when I get lonesome. And he started teaching me, so I said, well, the next time I come, I'm going to bring my guitar. And he started teaching me these chords on the guitar. And, lo and behold, to find out that this man had a very rich life and career and doing tremendous things. Just unfortunately, his life took some twists and turns toward the end. And when you have an illness compounded with low income and all those kinds of things, just put him in that particular circumstance at this point in time in life. but he had a vision of what he wanted to do. They all, the guys that I introduced my dad with and his little cohort of friends, they all had visions of what they wanted to do beyond the nursing home. And to just call them nursing home residents and to give them that narrative that they're there and that their children just kind of drop them off was so misleading, so unfair, and just inaccurate, incorrect. It was a thriving experience for me. I learned so much from those residents, and the narrative of who these people are just by this one snapshot in time is just, so inaccurate, and it's constraining to these individuals. And if the programs to get these people moving to the next point in life are just based on what you see right now, then none of them would be able to advance or to do anything other than what they're currently doing. My dad is out of the nursing home. He is thriving and living his best life now, and he has all kinds of plans.
Still mentoring, right? No, he's still mentoring.
Still mentoring, and has all kinds of plans for what he wants to do and who he wants to bring into his life, and what legacy he wants to leave. He graduated from college in 1950. He did a Facebook Live session with his alumni association. 2 years ago, we would not have thought that, but if we had held on to that narrative.
Myth busting, the stigma around older adults and technology.
That's right. That's right.
Right, which matters in employment, doesn't it, Maria? There's that mythology out there.
That's right. And the development of different kinds of technology to meet the needs of older individuals where they are is really, really critical.
The narrative piece, I think, is so powerful, and you've all talked about it, but I also hear each of you saying, take the time to ask questions, to find out who people are, to find out what employers' needs are, to find out the barriers and or successes in building connections in a community. And when we ask the questions, to actually sit back and listen to the responses so that we can build journeys that lead to more opportunity for more individuals. That's what I've heard from the three of you as such incredible leaders leading important research and organizations and work to open up opportunity for many more people, especially older adults, as they live, and the growing number who are living with low income and wanting more opportunity. So by way of wrap up, here we are at GSA's annual scientific meeting. And so we have a group of individuals across sectors who are engaged in a range of research, either individually or in a collaborative fashion. When we think about building resilience as a way to increase income and opportunity, in particular for older adults, are there areas of research, or each of you choose one, maybe an area of research that you would want someone joining us today to pick up, or a possible strategic partnership that you would want someone to be interested in forging? I'm going to start with you, Maria.
Yeah, I will pick up right where Valerie left off, which is around technology. So at JFF Labs, we are digging into technology solutions that can promote economic advancement. And we're looking at solutions in the area of career navigation, assessment, work-based learning, and internships. But I think what's missing is a very specific lens looking across that for workers over 50. So to me, that's where there's a great opportunity to dig in more, I think, for AARP, for others at the conference, to really look at how are the technology solutions that are being developed going to work, or possibly not work well for this population, and how to fill that gap.
Oh, I'm glad you called that out, Maria. It meets our shared interest in some projects we're working on together. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Risa.
Yeah, thank you. There are so many things that would be wonderful to partner on. I'll just say that I think there's a huge amount of interest right now in strengthening intergenerational approaches. And so working together to look across different types of geographies and, communities and, populations to think about how we can co-create intergenerational strategies at the community level, community design, policies, systems, environments, to strengthen social connections and a sense of belonging.
I'm so pleased that you made that suggestion or request, because it takes it back to our very beginning in this conversation about the interdependencies across generations. Thanks, Risa. And Valerie.
And I would concur. I would just say to remember that at the end of the day, this is a human endeavor. The systems are made up of human beings. It's more than bricks and mortar. And what we are doing is investing in human capital and social capital. And to the extent that we make a commitment to invest in that for the long haul, we can't go wrong in investing in people's lives and the quality of their lives.
So important to bring it back to the individual, Valerie, thank you, to really be thinking about that investment in each individual, people first. Right. Going back to that and helping us understand then what solutions we might want to be building and scaling, always with a very local lens, as we've heard, investing in people. Well, I know that everyone with us wants to join me before we look forward to taking some questions, but to join me in thanking my colleagues for a really inspiring conversation. So a huge thank you to you, Maria, and you, Risa, and you, Valerie. I'm glad that you came together to have this important conversation about building resiliency using hope, social connections, and economic opportunity as the drivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Well, what a treat to be here at GSA, and I have to say and call them to the stage with me, to Valerie and Maria and Teresa. I had this chance now to just watch our conversation again, and I want to begin the Q&A by letting you know how grateful I am for your colleagueship and our growing connections, partnerships, and friendship, and how excited I am that you are leaders out there in communities nationwide, focused on creating more opportunity and supporting resilience building for all people, with a focus on older adults living with low income, and really weaving together how we use hope, economic opportunity, and community connections to make that happen. So I want to get started. Risa, I'm going to call you up with me. There was a comment in our live Q&A that was when you were talking, that was mentioning that from Shannon, that as you were speaking, she was reminded of innovative models of intergenerational housing that exist, whether that's home sharing or building affordable housing that is purposefully designed for people to live together of multiple generations, or building housing that has necessary supports for connections. So just wanted to know if you wanted to add anything more about that role that you spoke about, that the right kind of housing plays in
Thank you.
creating resilience.
Yeah, and thank you for the comment about that. I think there are so many creative approaches to intergenerational housing and spaces around housing. And I'm certainly no expert in that matter, but in the last year or so that we've been having these conversations, I've been hearing more and more examples, and it really does feel like a win-win solution. So even just recently heard about a senior center that invited art students. It was actually senior residential area, invited art students from a local college to come and live there. And they could do so rent-free to help solve some of the shortage of housing for students.
Yes.
But also, in return, they were able to do art therapy, teach art lessons to some of the seniors that were there. And that intergenerational exchange, of course, is enriching for everyone. And so, I just think it's so exciting to think about all the creative approaches that communities could take in this way.
Yeah, thanks, Risa. And it really does get at responding to that comment that was put in Q&A, because that the co-housing or shared housing, which has been explored by a collaboration of colleges and universities to meet needs of students, as you're saying, needs of others in communities, is also tied, and Maria, you can please join us, is tied to, in essence, income opportunities, because for many older adults, it's both their competencies as well as their assets that can be used to leverage. So I don't know, Maria, if you could join us and comment on that as well.
Hi.
Hi, it's so good to see you.
Everyone. I agree. I think it's important to, just find creative ways to leverage the skills and the competencies of workers of all ages, and to, I love the intergenerational piece. I think adds kind of a dynamic to it that is really special. So I think, finding ways to engage that are beyond kind of traditional, looking at degree requirements or things like that is really key, and looking to see, how you can build community in unique ways.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. As you're saying, and it's building, it's in unique ways. It forces us, as it should, or challenges us, Maria, every time I hear you speak about this, to say, what are the pathways that are currently in place? How do you become, as you've all said today, more human-centric or people-centric in designing pathways that actually meet the pain points for individuals as they're trying to walk through curriculums? Valerie, I want you to join us. We have a wonderful, bring you back into our panel conversation. There's been a wonderful comment and really question for us in our chat, in the Q&A, that talks about the power of your words around changing single voice narratives, or those single narratives that become shared in society that both aren't true and also hold people down, and work to continue to allow us to have systems of discrimination, locking people out of opportunity, and might be tamping down hope, as you've talked about it. So if you could, talk about what each of us can be doing to build narratives that are fulsome and wholesome for people, to
Yes,
help them build their own narratives and to share their voices.
exactly. And I think having the opportunity for people to share their own story is really important. How do you want to be referred to? How would you characterize yourself, your life, and what you want to leave as a legacy is really important. Having a common language and a shared language is really important. Also, in kind of building and strengthening the narratives that inspire hope. If we're talking at one another and past one another, or using language that is restrictive and deterministic and fatalistic, then it's difficult for folks to kind of rise above that. But having a shared language and a common language where we're understanding that we're all striving together to achieve a goal, and a goal that's valued to me is really important. And in doing so, then that allows individuals to create their own narrative, to use their words in ways that are empowering and meaningful, and that kind of even create this vision of what you want to see for yourself in life, and gives you the inspiration to achieve and to participate in some of these programs that you're describing. Some of the biggest barriers to participating is the self-talk that folks have about what they feel that they can or can't do. And so helping folks to create this wonderful language, I used to call it building a linguistic repertoire, where people have words to draw from that are empowering, inspiring, and that are not constraining and holding people back.
Yeah, I want to stick on this because I went back into the Q&A to really look at this comment too, and want to call out that the author of it calls to the fore what you were talking about the stigma of trauma, and how that stigma of trauma prevents fulsome first-person narrative going forward. So I think about that in terms of how we build communities of connection. And then, Maria, I would turn to you also about, even as we're building our programs to reskill or upskill individuals, get them ready for the workforce, or Risa, in your work in helping communities forge solutions that are multi-sector and based on connections, how do we, Valerie, Risa, and Maria, address this stigma of trauma? What can we do as individuals? The narratives are not ours. They are the narratives of individuals, but we surely have a role in telling the fulsome narratives. And also, we are accountable that we don't contribute to the stigma or to the negative single voice narratives that are holding people back. So I know there's a lot there, but anyone jump in. It was a really important comment.
We are really focused at JFF on looking at the role that we can play by moving away from using kind of deficit-based language, which I think, in our field of education and workforce,
Yes.
unfortunately, I think relied on too much. And often, I don't think we really thought through kind of the impact of that language. And so we've been having some training for all of our staff about how we can really move to more of a very concrete asset frame. And a simple example I'll give is, if you read our publications from, maybe even a few years ago, we talked about low skill workers. And so now
did.
really moving away from that and really talking about the jobs that are low skill jobs and not kind of putting that deficit language on the individual. So that's the role that we think that we're able to play, is to model use of more asset based language.
I'm just, +1 for me on that work that you're focused on, Maria. And I do think it takes discipline, as you're saying, for an organization. And we have to look at our dictionaries of terms, right? We have to be sure we aren't labeling. And asset based always. When you were talking, it's low skilled or you're not competent in this. So that's all that negative talk. And Valerie, that has to tamp down hope for people who are hopeful.
Yeah, it does. But I think also we have to help individuals that we're working with to understand that language is out there. People are growing and evolving. And so in some environments that they'll work in and engage in, there'll be that kind of language used. And in other environments, there'll be more hopeful, optimistic language. But they have to be centered in who they are. And I think that's part of our job, so that people understand that they have to continuously tell their story. And we have to give them platforms for telling their story, creating their narratives. And they have to also recognize that they're growing and evolving. And so the language that we use for today might not be the language that you use tomorrow, even how you describe yourself and even how you tell your story. So I think, just having that flexibility is really important.
I think that's so great. And then Risa can jump in, because you're also reminding us, and Maria and I, as we're talking about it as it regards to workforce, like, don't print and bind that dictionary, because it is evolving language. So I hear you saying that. I also hear you talking about the mutuality. So the work and hope is a driver. Organizations, individuals have a role to play, but the individual themselves also has a role to play, which is us giving them space to tap into their own agency.
Yes.
And their own evolution. I've heard you talk about that many times. Risa, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to echo, and from a community level, that translates too, because what a lot of philanthropic leaders are recognizing the need to, rather than start with tell us all the problems that need to be addressed in your community, rather than start with that, it's tell us the strengths that you are building on in your community, or something similar. And community coalitions and private-public partnerships and neighborhood resident leaders and others, coming to a group setting where we share what's working, what has worked, what our assets are, what we're building on. People are always an asset. They always have something wonderful to bring, their wisdom, their experiences, their skills. And then also, the built environment, the natural environment around us. There are assets, there are places that people do love, and we can build from there. So it is a shift, and it's a beautiful shift that, we fully support.
I'm hearing about the beautiful shift from each of you. So I guess we'll wrap there. This conversation has been wonderful in the Q&A. Thank you to those who added questions, who helped us be solutions focused, to think about communities of connection, the language that we use, and to focus on people as assets, community assets, all of the opportunities. I'm thinking about it when we build new programs and organizations. We're always saying, what are the pain points? Important to know what those barriers are. But how about if we start from, what are the success points? What is working on your journey, and how do we leverage that more? Not in a way to diminish that there are barriers, but in a way to build from the successes first. So again, Valerie, Maria, Risa, thank you for joining me at GSA. It's such an important program. Thank you to those who attended today and the thousands who will be hearing this through the recorded opportunities. Stay tuned for more great work together. Thank you.